I'm here with Senator Hugh Segal, who is the author of several books. His latest is The Right Balance, Canada's Conservative Tradition, published by Douglas and McIntyre. And with no further ado, I'll ask you, how does the Canadian conservative tradition differ from that of the United States?
The United States has really been about a kind of exceptionalist view of right and wrong, marketplace uber alles, and that's really been the definition of a large part of conservatism in the United States for many, many years. If you look at the strains of Canadian conservatism, take the whole range. Take the Liberal Conservative Party of Sir John A. Macdonald, which is what it was called. Take the Conservative Unionist Party of Borden, who led us through the war, and was the political leader who was there at the time of Vimy Ridge. Take the Union Nationale in Quebec, which was about left-wing liberals and nationalist conservatives getting together to nationalize the power companies so that they wouldn't be raped, that the population wouldn't be raped and pillaged by the private power companies back then. If you look at the tradition in the West, John Diefenbaker and his progressive conservatism and his populism and his First Canada Human Rights Act. If you look at Bible Bill Aberhart campaigned under the, eliminate poverty in a time of plenty. He was on the right, but it was part of a populism that came out of the Depression, not very different from the kind of populism that came with Tommy Douglas out of the Depression. So you put all those pieces together with the Alliance and the Reform and the new Conservative Coalition, and you sort of understand that our brand is very different from a brand that started with the Patriots in the United States, that was about building democracy against the Crown in open revolution, whereas in our process, conservatives built democracy by evolving with the Crown in a way that didn't produce massive bloodshed, didn't lead to a massive civil war in which 500,000 Americans died. And so I think there's a tone and an approach to our conservatism which is different. I don't say it's better, Charlie. Every country's culture is reflected in its politics and vice versa, but it is different. American conservatism, British conservatism, which is about landed gentry and class distinction, that's really not our tradition. Having believed that, I thought I owed the Canadian public to make the case as best I could as to why I believe that, so they can evaluate that on their own.
And how does this Canadian conservative tradition manifest itself in how we deal with diversity and race relations?
Well, if you go all the way back to the great division between Lord Durham, who was called Radical Jack, he was a British Liberal, sent by a young Queen Victoria to deal with the rebellion in Canada, versus Lord Elgin, who came 2 Governor Generals later, who was a traditional, quintessential Tory. Radical Jack said in the famous Durham Report, you got to put everybody together, everybody's the same, no special cases, no special concern, no special compassion. That's how to protect people's rights and keep Canada alive. That's not what Elgin said. Elgin said, no, you got to respect people for who they are. First Nations are who they are, French Canadians are who they are. The Quebec Act of 1774, which protected the rights of French Canadians to their religion and their language and their culture, one of the reasons they didn't join with the Americans in the Revolution of 1775, 1776. So we have a different tradition.
But what would you say to somebody who looks at the Indian Act and looks at Sir John A. Macdonald?
Well, the Indian Act today wouldn't pass any test.
I'm talking about 1885.
I understand. I'm for abolishing the one we have today. I think it's horrific. I think it's colonial. I think it's offensive. I agree with the chief of the AFN who says we have to replace it with another and more appropriate approach. But I think it's a mistake to judge decisions made in the 1860s and the 1870s by our standards today. I don't think that's completely fair in terms of what they thought they were doing at the time. But let's be clear that in that time, the superior view that Western civilization took of all the Aboriginal groups that they came into contact with in Australia, in the United States, in Canada, was a very condescending view, which we would find inappropriate today, but was part of the operative culture then.
And your book focuses a fair amount of attention on Quebec. And can you explain, as you see it, the relationship between Quebec's history and its current economy, and even its business model?
Well, sure. I think it's really simple. If you take a look at the process by which, even in the old Quebec, the Ancien Regime, before the fall of the Plains of Abraham, the way in which it was organized with the intendants, with the seigneurs and the land grants, and the fact that the local Seigneur in a region was also the local source of justice, also dealt with people who were in financial difficulty. It was a much more collectivist approach, much more of a we are all part of the same society and we have to help. You earned your citizenship by working hard on the farm. You had your language and religion protected as part of the commitment to New France, surviving and sustaining itself. And that has continued in the way in which Quebec has approached a lot of issues today, from daycare, from the way it runs its power corporations, from the Caisse de dépôt. That is a long and traditional part of their more collectivist Quebec Inc. approach. It works superbly in some areas, not so well in others, because the world has changed. But those roots are very real, and I say that those roots, make the case in the book, are a big part of why the Conservative Party has developed in a way that saw us, under R.B. Bennett, create the Bank of Canada, create the CBC, create the Wheat Board, create a whole bunch of bodies which didn't exist, but had to exist because the marketplace could not be trusted to either have sufficient capacity or to be helpful to people who were really down on their luck, as they were during the Depression, during which R.B. Bennett was our Prime Minister. So you can see that strain continue.
Well, I guess we see it here in British Columbia with Premier W.A.C. Bennett, who was a conservative,
yes.
social credit,
yes.
creating BC Hydro.